Hello. Hello. I'll look it up. These are like really half-assed. In my psychology class during my junior year of high school, we learned about a lot of things. We learned about Pavlov and his classical conditioning with dogs, Sigmund Freud's beliefs about the unconscious in children, and Ash's conformity experiments. We also learned about the hierarchy of needs. It was described by our teacher as an approach to achieving your quote-unquote highest self, self-actualization. My teacher explained this hierarchy as a part of humanistic psychology, which he defined as a psychological approach which emphasized the study of the whole person. The idea of self-improvement in such a scientific field intrigued me, and eventually I ended up majoring in psychology. Who was the one to make the hierarchy of needs? Well, look no further than Abraham Maslow. Born 1908 in Brooklyn, New York, oldest of 7 siblings, and for some reason, married his first cousin. He dropped out of Cornell University in his first year of college and then got his bachelor's, master's, and PhD at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He is considered to be the father of humanistic psychology, also known as the third force, more on that later, with his initial research being in the field of behavioralism. He would soon go on to write multiple books and be elected the president of the APA, which can be defined as the American Psychology Association, in 1968. Because of his work, the APA approved humanistic psychology as a branch of psychology in 1971. Well, what is humanistic psychology? Jan D. Sinnott described key details of the humanistic view with 5 key principles in a work titled, quote, Humanistic Psychology, Learning and Teaching the Whole Person, stating them as, quote, A. Subjective reality guides human behavior. B. Individual differences are more important than group characteristics. C. The goal of science should include discovery of the things that expand the human experience. D. A research goal should be able to solve human problems. And E. A goal of psychology should be able to understand what it consciously means to live a human existence. Unquote. The branch focuses on concepts like free will, self-direction, choice, self-actualization, and living your life to the fullest. It believes that anyone can get to self-actualization if they have the steps to do so, no matter what psychological condition you have or don't have. It usually focuses on qualitative research methods, which means that it doesn't use numbers or statistics as much. Psychology itself is more quote-unquote individual over a whole group, which is more sociology. But humanistic psychology takes it to an even further degree. Humanistic psychology's research methods tend to revolve around open-ended questionnaires, unstructured interviews, observational studies, and case studies. It focuses less on the past but instead the present. Because of this, humanistic psychology is fairly useful in therapy. The biggest example of this is client-centered therapy, which is one of the most popular types of therapy. Like the name suggests, its focus is that the client is best able to determine how to explore their own therapy. It's important to review psychology to have a conversation like this. Psychology is considered a social science, defined as, quote, the scientific study of human society and social relationships, end quote. It's considered to be the bridge between natural science and social sciences because it deals with the human mind and its behavior. One of the biggest conversations in psychology that reflects this is the older debate of nature versus nurture. Although, more modernly, most social scientists have come to the consensus that the most morally great actions are a mixture of both, the nature is considerably more natural science, and nurture is social science. Because psychology is a social science, its presence as an actual field of study to be taken seriously wasn't until the later part of the 19th century, thanks to advocates like Dorothea Dix and significant European and American psychologists alike. Behavioralism and psychoanalysis became popular as they did because of their sound scientific basis and ability to be experimented on to determine their validity. Famous psychologist Sigmund Freud's theory on psychoanalysis, which would be the unconscious desires shaping personality and their actions, and John B. Watson's ideas on behavioralism, that all behaviors are learned from environmental factors and can be manipulated. Events such as World War I and II contributed to these early psychologists' popularities, with topics such as the milligram experiment reflecting interest in why/if people, such as the Nazis, were psychologically influenced as they claimed they were. Because psychology was popularized a bit later than other sciences in Europe and America, during Watson's and Freud's time, there wasn't a lot of earlier bases to go off of. Their work also dominated the field because there wasn't much of anything else. They laid the foundation, making psychology, at the time, very natural science and experiment-based. Maslow was inspired from the lack of emotional components in his early research. He felt that Freud's theories and others were very pessimistic and didn't account for the good that humanity could accomplish. Hence, he founded humanistic psychology and was deemed the third force. He would soon find that he wasn't alone in these beliefs. Although Maslow released The Hierarchy of Needs in 1943, it wasn't until the 60s when humanistic psychology became truly popular. The many advocates of human psychology focused on the consciousness of individuals. They honed in on healthy relationships between psychiatrists and their clients, and a brighter figure of hope. These figures were far more than just Abraham Maslow. Carl Rogers was his mentor, in fact. Slightly older than him and also having gotten his bachelor's at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, he was the founder of client-centered therapy. He also came up with the unconditional positive self-regard, which differed than empathy because all it required was the sympathy of a therapist to a client. Gordon Allport studied personality through conscious traits rather than Freud's popular psychoanalytic stages. Rollo May also studied the capacity for growth and achievement in human beings, proposing anxiety as the result of uncertainty and death in life. Many of these psychologists were born in the early 1900s, and as they started to die in the 70s and 80s, so did their theories. Something that humored me when first learning about humanistic psychology was that it was viewed as, quote, too positive of a theory. But there were also a few other criticisms that emerged from opposing onlookers. These are categorized as vague concepts. Self-actualization is not only a subjective experience but can't be defined by any physical means. Because of this, many experiments surrounding humanistic psychology are far more specific than their behavioralistic counterparts, and have less grounds to stand on to be relatable to a general audience without seeming unscientific. Which is scientific. Rollo May himself was classified with being an essential psychotherapist. Humanistic psychology is typically associated with much more abstract concepts that are deemed too philosophical for psychology. A big critique of this approach is that it fails to see the evil in human beings, simply focusing on the good that can be brought out of it. In addition, some of these critiques also say the humanistic approach is avoiding or ignoring the truths of behavioralism and psychoanalysis, mostly behavioralism, too much, which is adding to the bloated optimism. There are also criticisms for certain humanistic theories, such as the hierarchy of needs mentioned earlier. For those unfamiliar with the hierarchy, it's a pyramid of 5 different tiers: physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Physiological needs are typically air, food, water, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Safety needs are typically personal security, employment, resources, health, and property. Love and belonging needs are typically friendship, intimacy, family, and a sense of connection. Esteem is typically respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. And then self-actualization, the highest form, is defined as the desire to become the most that one person can possibly be. It's like Aristotle's highest good. According to the hierarchy, you need to climb all 4 to get to self-actualization. Most people tend to stay on esteem. Some people argue that the example of a pyramid isn't inclusive of the fact that there's some steps that can be reached before others. For example, an individual might have esteem but lack love and belonging. Maybe a person has love and belonging via a family but lacks basic needs like shelter and food because of natural disasters or war. Later on in his life, Maslow had claimed in an interview that he was reconsidering the idea of a pyramid because of these criticisms, but he was far older at that point. Some of these critiques are more valid than others. There's also the discussion of politics. During the 80s, there was a huge spike in conservative media and beliefs because of technological advancements in medicine and electronics, as well as President Reagan. Elkins proclaimed that, quote, humanistic psychology is inherently incompatible with right-wing ideologies that seek to impose rigid moral values and suppress civil liberties and individual freedom. Humanistic psychology is a psychology of liberation focused on change and growth, a passion vision that all human beings have dignity and worth. Perhaps because of the unwritten taboo against discussing politics in scholarly venues, humanistic psychologists have been reluctant to explicitly acknowledge their liberal foundations, end quote. Humanistic psychology's views were opposingly more, quote, liberal because they focused on self-actualization, which was inherently more individualistic and self-centered. Behavioralism and psychoanalysis, which humanistic psychology aimed to oppose, were and still can be more conservative. Thus, humanistic psychology was more likely to be shunned and accused of being politically charged. Lastly, positive psychology, defined as the study of practicing to be happy and optimistic in life. Its founder, Martin Seligman, called it, quote, applied optimal functioning. It focuses on redirection to be positive and productive. It gained popularity in the 90s and since then it has been considered more scientific than humanistic psychology. Its basis was evolved from humanistic psychology, in fact, and today it faces mostly positive feedback from critics. Because positive psychology and humanistic psychology have so much overlap, it left humanistic psychology to be a seemingly fad of the past. Alan Waterman, in The American Psychologist, Positive Psychology Divide, Contrast, in Philosophical Foundation, claims that, quote, although Abraham Maslow, a key figure in the origin and evolution of humanistic psychology, wrote extensively about positive motivation, positive growth, and positive emotions, and used the term positive psychology in his book, Motivation and Personality, positive psychologists seldom reach out to endorse humanistic endeavors. To the contrary, Seligman and Criticizing, 2000, criticized humanistic psychology for its association with self-help movements and for encouraging self-centeredness, criticisms that appear seriously misplaced to humanistic psychologists, end quote. But humanistic psychology's contributions to modern therapy and psychology in general are monumental. Maslow and Rogers' theories of self-love and importance helped the 70s mental health movement, emphasizing free choice and responsibility. It helped spread the idea that someone didn't need to have diagnosable issues to benefit from therapy or counseling, and that people who have diagnosable conditions weren't unable to reach happiness and self-actualization. Instead of largely focusing on scientific solutions and explanations for people's quote-unquote issues, they focused on educational and emotional growth and the social aspects that help to fuel this growth. If we follow the belief that humanistic psychology still has a place for modern psychology, well, where does it? In Emilio Giogordi's, quote, remaining challenges for humanistic psychology, in Emilio Giogordi's Remaining Challenges for Humanistic Psychology, he claims that, quote, we must discover or invent new ways of being scientific. If we do successfully bracket that hold that the natural sciences have in us, we might find ways of understanding ourselves that genuinely surprise us. Ways that do not only reduce us, but enhance our humanness, end quote. Where does the line between social science and natural sciences blur? In the same article, it is also said that, quote, then, to achieve that claim, or aim, Rogers believed that we would have to develop an adequate conception of psychology that was genuinely humanistic. In the 40 years that have passed since Rogers raised that issue, have we developed that kind of science? Have we really broken free from the criteria of natural science and developed a different conception of science? I doubt it. We have been caught between breakthroughs and outright rejection of the scientific criteria. The rejection of science may be tolerable for therapeutic practices, but ultimately those practices too would have to be solidly based on sound research. We've been more successful in radicalizing experimental processes than fully understanding them. It was also Rogers, from 1985, who warned that unless humanistic psychology could become fairly represented in academia, it would not be successful, end quote. Unlike positive psychology, humanistic psychology is only really seen as useful in therapeutic settings and, quote, general aid. But this lack of foundational research could be redefined. There is potential for more experimental bases with humanistic psychology. There could be multiple defined definitions of self-actualization, or a more general one. With that, it would be easier to run experiments for a more sound foundation. You could expand such theories like Maslow's hierarchy with making it less like a ladder and more like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, and base those experiments with real ones that aren't just Eurocentric under the criticism of Maslow's. Humanistic psychology isn't looking to be the branch of psychology, but one that has enough research bias to be taken seriously. A lot of psychology isn't necessarily scientific, but set up theories with research that's constantly being debunked and retested. If given the resources and time, and possibly collaboration with positive psychology, much of its original merit could find a home. That is to be said. Maybe the future of humanistic psychology isn't how it is now, but a hybrid of itself and positive psychology. If it chooses to acknowledge itself as too abstract, then it can change. Philosophical concepts, then, maybe need to be reevaluated as well. Maybe there's more merit to them than how we think about these psychological concepts. Maybe instead they can start to influence how we view more natural science-type experiments. Make the humanistic more research-based. Are there different types of self-actualization? What do they look like? Are there different types of self-esteem that are positive? What kind of strategies can help get us to these places? Meanwhile, philosophical concepts like self-actualization can help influence creative thought for these more researchable ideas. We need these ideas to keep psychology stimulated. It's why so many people are attracted to social science, because it gets in the cores of our philosophies. It would be weird to completely dismiss the social aspect of psychology. We need those ideas. They can't all be compartmentalized. However, as it is, both more natural sciences and more humanistic sciences are too polar of one another to work together. Natural science is favored and taken more seriously, so it's valued more. Either natural science or humanistic science, or maybe both, needs to be redefined to fit the other. Both aspects are needed to use psychology as a social science to its full potential. Both aspects are needed to use psychology as a social science to its full potential. In short, humanistic psychology was popular for a reason. Social scientists wanted there to be a balance between pessimistic psychoanalysis and hopeful humanistic approaches. In an ideal and most realistic world, there is a bit of both. Both need to exist to make the social science what it is. There isn't an exact barrier where social or natural sciences are too much other than total domination. In most cases, truthful things can be drawn from all parties. This is certainly true for Freud's theories. Humanistic psychology is still useful in modern day because it is actively stimulating the need for self-esteem and philosophical conversation in psychology. Because it is more abstract, it challenges the field more than just numbers and marks inspiration for future experiments, and scientists that really care about their jobs and the world. Hopefully in the future, the topic of positive psychology can at least draw more ideas from humanistic psychology. Psychotherapy in particular could benefit more than it already has from this perspective. Thank you.